Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. And today we're going to talk about peeing. That's right, that's part of the episode today, a major aspect of it. Not just any kind of peeing, but what is called contagious urination among chimpanzees. Yes, really, I'm, I'm going there. So, at the Kumamoto Sanctuary in Japan, a research team led by Ina Onishi from Kyoto University logged more than 600 hours observing 20 chimps. In that time, it was documented that there were 1,328 urination events, enough data to notice something odd. When one chimp peed, others nearby were significantly more likely to join within a minute. And this wasn't random, it was patterned, predictable, and as the saying goes, contagious. So, what that means in this context is simply that when one starts to do it, others tend to follow. And it really is a sort of interesting topic. The researchers found that chimps within half a meter, about 50 to 60 centimeters of the first peer, or where they were twice as likely to urinate right after. But here's the twist: the urge didn't spread equally. It flowed down the dominance ladder. Lower ranking chimps were much more likely to mirror the behavior of their more powerful peers, not because they were best friends, not because they were close, but most likely because they were paying attention to the pecking order. In other words, hierarchy, not friendship, shaped the ripple. And yeah, so maybe they all heard some trickling water or thought of some trickling water in their minds, and it made them have to go. I don't know, but it's a it's apparently a predictable pattern, and there are some interesting implications to it that don't have to do with a strictly enforced hierarchy. I'll get around to that in a moment. But if the basic premise sounds familiar, that's because it is. Humans have versions of this too. Not women are kind of famous for often going to the bathroom in groups, and it is not so surprising then that you can find other animals doing this as well. And in Japan, there's even a word for it, and I'm probably not going to pronounce it correctly, but surashan, or companion peeing, it's called. And across cultures, there are even some old proverbs about this very sort of topic, like the Italian saying, whoever doesn't pee in company is either a thief or a spy. So, yeah, that's a sort of interesting dynamic here. So, I don't really believe that saying, because I often pee alone and I don't feel like I'm a thief or a spy. But nevertheless, that is apparently some sort of Italian saying. And it starts as a curious quirk of chimp behavior, but it actually sort of cracks open something bigger: how living beings coordinate, bond, and move as one, not through rigid commands, but through mutual attunement. So there's a slightly more serious tone to the story than it initially sounds like, right? Because it has some actual serious implications about how living things can behave. So let's step back for a moment and ask, why might contagious peeing matter? Is this just a silly story, or is there actually something to it? Well, the researchers suggest it serves several evolutionary functions: group coordination, that is, syncing internal states before a journey. It could be a matter of territorial strategy, clustering urine to localize scent and maybe avoid predators. and social signaling, a low key way of saying we're safe here or we're together. As one Redditor put it, the boss thinks it's safe, so it probably is. And another user noted it might just be efficient. They said better to all do it together than make multiple stops, avoids leaving a trail. So those two, I mean, even though they're just sort of random Reddit comments, they do sound plausible as a sort of explanation for some of this, right? Because sure, it's a safety in numbers thing potentially, but it also just makes sense to you know avoid leaving a trail or whatever. Having having the complex group dynamics made even more complex. So, what we're seeing is sort of a decentralized, spontaneous behavior that strengthens the group, even though, yes, there's also the angle of hierarchy involved. It's also apparently mostly spontaneous, and it doesn't seem that it's being commanded of the other chimps to follow the leader as much as it is just them naturally kind of gravitating towards this behavior. At least from what I understand about the study, there's no leaders barking orders, no rigid hierarchy forcing compliance, just a shared pulse, if you will, rippling out through observation and imitation. And that's where this gets almost political, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way. So, even from sort of a, I guess, radical anarchist perspective, if you will, this research offers more than biology. It's like a metaphor for collective action without coercion, even within the confines of the primate hierarchy or whatever you want to call it. So, the chimps don't wait for approval. They don't follow instructions necessarily. They just align, not exactly through pressure, but presence. And lower ranked chimps aren't forced to join in, apparently. They choose to, again, from what I've read in this little, or in my research on this particular story. And it's apparently not just blind obedience, but a sort of group cohesion. Now, you might say that was a Freudian slip that I used the word grope, but I kind of jumbled up the word cohesion with group, and it came out as grope. So I suppose there could be some grope cohesion here as well, but that wasn't mentioned in any studies. But even I think the premise of mutual aid comes to mind here because it is sort of a spontaneous organization. Again, not imposed top down, but built ground up from shared need and trust. So that this is what decentralized power can look like. Attunement over authority, at least in the world of the chimp. And I suppose you could hear the soft primate calls as you think about these chimps going about their business, and it's quite a mental image to, to think about them all like standing at a urinal or something like that. But this also challenges our own hangups a little bit. In many human societies, peeing is taboo, and even talking about it is awkward. But in the animal world, the non-human animal world, these moments are not shameful. They're more communal, and they're part of how the group works. And yet, even in the human world, you still have some aspects of this. You've got urinals right by each other. Again, like I said, you have women who sort of stereotypically go to the bathroom in groups and all that kind of stuff. Now, I know they're not always doing a number one or a number two. Sometimes they go in there to work on makeup or whatever. Whatever. A pervert might have other fantasies about what happens in there, but it's it's not it's It's not 100% similar to what chimps do, I'm sure. But the point is there's a little bit of a crossover here. And maybe it's time we stop treating our biology as embarrassing, even though I can't help but do that because it is. But we should maybe start seeing it more as a foundation for solidarity. And that sounds like a joke, but I guess it's kind of not because we're all living beings. We all have to use the bathroom. And I'm going to get a little bit crass here, but there's that saying about people who feel like they're superior to everyone, that their shit doesn't stink. That classic expression. Well, implied in that saying is that ordinary people who don't have who the problem of being egocentric, they accept the fact that we're actually animal in nature, so we're all not above the phenomenon of using the bathroom. So it kind of takes people down a peg if you have this sort of foundation where, hey, we're all in this together. We all have the same bodily functions. And it kind of, well, I mean, think about North Korea. What have we heard about Kim Jong Il back when he was alive? There was allegedly a teaching that their dear leader over there didn't even have bodily functions, that he was that much like a god, that he didn't actually sit down on the porcelain throne and squeeze one out. So I think it's I think it's a very decent message that, hey, all of these people who act like they're high and mighty and so powerful and privileged and rich and all that kind of stuff, well, they still use the bathroom too. Another thing is that they put their pants on one leg at a time. That's another saying about people to show that, hey, they're a little bit more down to earth. And I think the same premise here could be applied to the phenomenon of bathroom dynamics. I almost, for some reason, I said bathroom. I don't know, like you have precious stones. I I don't know. I got a little sidetracked on that one. So anyway, what's next for these types of studies? That's another interesting question. So I think we need to take it beyond the lab, study wild chimps to see if the behavior holds in nature as more of a general phenomenon. Compare across species. You got bonobos, gorillas, maybe even non-primates. See to what extent this type of behavior is mirrored in other animal examples, and test whether this group urination actually reduces predator risk or if it boosts movement efficiency. Because right now, this is, just a sort of fluff story about so called contagious urination. But it is interesting to think about if it applies in any other species. I kind of doubt it would be universal because animals are so unique. There are probably different behaviors that you could find. But if it turns out to be widespread, it might say something profound, really, that even the simplest acts, yes, even peeing, can be a form of communication, coordination, and even collective intelligence. So maybe what we call mundane is really where the action is. Maybe evolution doesn't just shape teeth and claws, but group rhythms, social glue, and shared safety rituals. So, next time you're in a bathroom with your pals and someone says, I'll go if you go, you're participating in a ritual that's older than words. Well, either that or it's just some freaky fetish. Well, that's all I have to say about this. So, thanks for listening. And, you know, I, I don't know if there was anything that special to learn here, but it was a fun and quirky topic, and I'm glad to address it.